Have you ever heard of a figure so controversial that she was erased from history, only to be whispered about in myth, religion, and legend? Today we're uncovering the secrets of one such figure. Welcome back, everyone. Here on this channel, we don't just explore the past, we resurrect the forgotten and give voice to those lost in the shadows of time. And trust me, what we're about to dive into is something you won't want to miss. If you're captivated by forbidden tales and hidden histories, this is the place to be. Lilith, a name shrouded in darkness, mystery, and debate. Now, you might have heard the name Lilith before, but her true origins and story remain a mystery to many. Was she really Adam's first wife, as some ancient texts suggest, or is she a figure created by later mythologies? Why does Lilith's story seem to vanish from mainstream biblical canon, only to reappear in Jewish mysticism and even modern culture? And perhaps most importantly, why has she become a symbol of rebellion, independence, and defiance across generations? In this three-part series, we'll dive deep into Lilith's story, tracing her evolution across 5,000 years, from ancient Sumerian mythology to Jewish mystical texts and beyond. To truly understand Lilith, we need to go back more than 5,000 years to one of the world's oldest civilizations, Sumer, located in what is now modern-day Iraq. The Sumerians are credited with creating the first known complex society, complete with cities, temples, and a pantheon of gods and goddesses. It is in this rich ancient culture that we find the earliest seeds of the Lilith myth. In Sumerian mythology, Lilith is often linked to a group of supernatural beings known as Lilu. These Lilu were storm and wind demons believed to cause harm, particularly during childbirth and in the care of newborns. It's important to note that Sumerians believed these spirits were often disruptive forces of nature, embodying the chaos and unpredictability of life. The name Lilith itself is derived from the Sumerian word Lilittu, which means wind or spirit. One of the earliest stories in which Lilith, or a precursor to her, appears is the Epic of Gilgamesh and the tale known as Inanna and the Huluppu tree. In this story, the goddess Inanna, who was revered as the deity of love, fertility, and war, discovers a Huluppu tree growing by the Euphrates River. She takes the tree to her sacred garden with the intent of nurturing it so that she could use its wood to create a throne and a bed. However, as the tree grows, it becomes infested with unwanted creatures. One of them is a serpent that makes its home in the tree's roots. But perhaps more ominously, a bird called the Anzu makes its nest in the branches, and Lilith, a dark winged spirit, takes up residence in the trunk. This version of Lilith is not the familiar figure from later Jewish folklore, but an earlier representation of a nocturnal, dangerous being, likely feared for her association with the unpredictable and sometimes malevolent forces of nature. In the story, Inanna grows increasingly frustrated with the infestation of her tree, particularly with the presence of Lilith. She calls upon the hero Gilgamesh to rid her tree of these troublesome entities. Armed with his weapons, Gilgamesh slays the serpent, sends the Anzu bird fleeing, and finally forces Lilith to abandon her house in the trunk of the tree. Lilith then flees into the wilderness, a recurring theme in her later stories. This Sumerian myth is one of the earliest known references to Lilith and provides key insights into her character's evolution. Here, she is not yet the figure of Adam's rebellious wife or a demoness that haunts infants, but rather a supernatural entity linked to nature, specifically to trees and the wilderness. However, this early image of Lilith as a creature of the night and a spirit of the wilderness laid the groundwork for her development in later mythology. As the myth of Lilith traveled westward through ancient Mesopotamia, it evolved, and one of the most important symbols associated with her became the owl. In ancient cultures, the owl was often a symbol of death, night, and the unknown. It was a bird of prey, feared and respected for its ability to hunt in darkness. Lilith's connection to the owl becomes evident in several ancient texts. In fact, the word Lilith is sometimes translated as screech owl or night creature. This connection to the owl is crucial because it reinforces her association with the night, mystery, and danger. In ancient Mesopotamian culture, the wilderness was considered a place of chaos, and nocturnal animals like the owl were often seen as agents of that chaos. In the same way, Lilith was seen as a force of nature, wild, uncontrollable, and untamable. The owl symbolism becomes even more significant when we consider that Lilith's name itself likely means night or night monster. In ancient Sumerian, Lilith referred to spirits of the night, and it is from this root that we get the later figure of Lilith. The owl, a nocturnal predator, became a powerful symbol for this dangerous, mysterious female figure. Now let's fast forward several centuries to the time when the ancient Hebrews, having settled in the land of Canaan, began developing their own religious traditions and writing the texts that would become the Hebrew Bible. Although the figure of Lilith does not appear frequently in the Hebrew scriptures, she is mentioned explicitly in one intriguing passage. The only direct reference to Lilith in the Bible is found in the book of Isaiah, specifically in Isaiah 34:14. This chapter is a prophetic declaration of divine judgment upon the nations, particularly Edom, and describes a desolate wilderness filled with wild animals and other worldly creatures. It says, "Desert creatures will meet with hyenas, and wild goats will bleat to each other. The night creature, or Lilith, will lie down there and find for themselves places of rest." This verse has caused much debate among scholars and translators. In the Hebrew text, the word used is Lilith, but depending on the translation, it has been rendered as night creature, screech owl, or simply Lilith. The King James Version, for instance, translates it as screech owl, whereas the New Revised Standard Version keeps the name Lilith. What are we to make of this cryptic reference? Isaiah 34 is describing a desolate post-apocalyptic wilderness, a place abandoned by humans and left to wild animals and demonic forces. Lilith's presence here aligns with her earlier portrayals in Mesopotamian mythology as a spirit of the wilderness and the night. But was the prophet Isaiah truly referring to the same Lilith as in the older Sumerian legends? Or was this simply a metaphor for chaos and evil lurking in the desolate places? While we may never know exactly what the prophet Isaiah intended, what is clear is that Lilith had already become a figure deeply associated with darkness, wilderness, and danger by this time. And while her role in the Hebrew Bible is minor, this reference in Isaiah is significant because it shows that the myth of Lilith had survived for centuries and continued to hold cultural meaning in the ancient Near East. Lilith's story, however, did not remain confined to the pages of Isaiah. Over time, as the ancient civilizations of Mesopotamia, Canaan, and Israel interacted through trade, conquest, and cultural exchange, Lilith's myth continued to evolve. The Babylonians and Assyrians adapted the Lilith myth, associating her with the storm demon known as Lilu, and linking her to death and destruction. As the myth spread, Lilith became increasingly seen as a demoness, particularly in later Jewish folklore and mysticism. She was believed to haunt the night, preying on infants and pregnant women. This transition from a nature spirit or night creature into a demon is one of the most fascinating aspects of Lilith's story, and it reflects the evolving fears and concerns of ancient societies. At this point in history, Lilith was not yet seen as Adam's first wife, but as a destructive force, sometimes associated with storms, death, and infant mortality. It's likely that the myths about Lilith continued to spread and transform as they were passed from one culture to another, with each society adding its own fears and interpretations to the story. Now, as we move forward into Jewish tradition, we begin to see Lilith transform from a shadowy figure into a more prominent character, and this is where things really get interesting. The most famous story of Lilith comes from a medieval Jewish text called the Alphabet of Ben Sira, written around 700 to 1000 CE. In this text, Lilith is introduced not just as a demon but as Adam's first wife. But why was Lilith Adam's first wife, and why does this story stand out in Jewish folklore? The explanation lies in the two different accounts of creation found in the book of Genesis. In Genesis 1, it says that God created man and woman at the same time. So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God he created them. Male and female he created them. Genesis 1:27. However, when we move to Genesis 2, there's a more detailed story about Adam being created first, and then Eve being fashioned from his rib to be his companion. This apparent discrepancy led to much debate among scholars and early Jewish theologians. Some propose that the woman created in Genesis 1 was not Eve, but Lilith. According to the alphabet of Ben Sira, Lilith and Adam were created from the same earth, making them equals. However, this equality became the source of conflict. Lilith refused to submit to Adam, particularly during sexual relations, where Adam demanded that she lay beneath him. Lilith, feeling that they were equals, refused to be subjugated and fled the Garden of Eden, uttering the unspeakable name of God, which gave her the power to fly away. This act of defiance, where Lilith chose her freedom over submission, cemented her place in folklore as a symbol of female independence and rebellion. Once Lilith had fled, Adam, left lonely and sorrowful, asked God for help. In response, God sent 3 angels, Senoi, Sansonoi, and Samanjaloth, to bring Lilith back. According to the story, they found Lilith at the Red Sea, where she had taken refuge. The angels conveyed God's command, urging Lilith to return to Adam. But Lilith, ever defiant, refused. She would not go back to a life where she had to give up her autonomy and freedom. The angels, determined to fulfill their task, warned her that if she did not return, 100 of her children would die every day. It's here that we see a dark transformation in Lilith's character, from a rebellious woman seeking equality to a figure associated with infant mortality. Lilith agreed to a deal with the angels. She would accept the loss of her children, but in exchange she vowed not to harm any newborns who bore the names of these angels on protective amulets. This is why, in Jewish tradition, amulets inscribed with the names of these angels were often placed near infants to protect them from Lilith. This story adds layers to Lilith's character. On the one hand, she represents a woman refusing to submit to male dominance, but on the other, her refusal comes at the cost of her children, marking her as a dangerous figure associated with infant death. Her role as a killer of infants would only grow in later interpretations, as she became a symbol of miscarriage, stillbirth, and infant mortality in Jewish folklore. Lilith's evolution from a rebellious figure to a demon preying on infants represents a shift in how societies viewed her. In ancient Mesopotamian texts, she was a spirit of the night, but in Jewish tradition, she becomes something far more sinister. Over time, Lilith was increasingly blamed for sudden infant death syndrome, SIDS, miscarriages, and other tragedies that were not yet understood by the people of the time. Her connection with infant mortality is also reflective of the deep-seated anxieties surrounding childbirth in the ancient world. Infant mortality rates were high, and childbirth was a dangerous process for both the mother and the child. In this context, the figure of Lilith evolved into a demon who preyed on newborns, offering an explanation for these seemingly random and tragic events. To protect against Lilith, Jewish families began to rely on ritual magic. Amulets bearing the names of the angels Senoi, Sansenoi, and Samanjaloth were hung in nurseries, around cradles, and sometimes worn by mothers to ward off Lilith's influence. In the medieval Kabbalistic tradition, these amulets became even more significant, with Lilith portrayed as a dangerous force that could only be countered through the invocation of divine protection. This leads us to Lilith's role in Kabbalistic literature, where her character is expanded even further, and her connection to evil and chaos becomes more pronounced. Lilith's role as a demon solidified in the Babylonian Talmud, a central text in Rabbinic Judaism. Here, Lilith is referred to multiple times as a dangerous figure. In Shabbat 151b it states, "It is forbidden for a man to sleep alone in a house lest Lilith seize him." This passage reinforces the idea of Lilith as a night demon, capable of harming those who are vulnerable or unprotected. Another reference in Niddah 24b describes Lilith as a winged creature with a human face, identifying her as both human and demonic. These references contribute to Lilith's growing mythos as a creature who bridges the gap between humanity and the demonic realm, further cementing her role as a figure of fear. But it's in the Kabbalah, the mystical branch of Judaism, where Lilith's character takes on even greater significance. The Kabbalistic text known as the Zohar, written in the 13th century in Spain, presents Lilith as not only Adam's first wife, but also as the wife of Satan. In this mystical framework, Lilith becomes the embodiment of the unholy feminine, the chaotic counterpart to the divine feminine aspect of God known as the Shekinah. According to the Zohar, Lilith's separation from Adam is mirrored by the separation of the divine masculine and feminine. As Lilith becomes linked with Satan, she is cast as a figure of chaos, destruction, and sexual promiscuity, contrasting with the pure, nurturing qualities of the Shekinah. This duality between Lilith and the Shekinah reflects the Kabbalistic idea that cosmic balance can only be restored when the masculine and feminine are reunited in harmony, a balance that will ultimately be achieved through the coming of the Messiah. Although Lilith's reputation as a demoness in Jewish folklore casts her in a dark and terrifying light, modern interpretations of Lilith have reclaimed her as a symbol of feminist strength and independence. In contemporary feminist thought, Lilith is often celebrated as a figure who refused to accept patriarchal oppression, choosing autonomy and freedom over subjugation, even at great personal cost. Her defiance against Adam has been reframed as an act of courage, a rejection of traditional gender roles and a demand for equality. In this light, Lilith becomes a symbol for women who refuse to be dominated or controlled by societal expectations, particularly in relation to marriage, sexuality, and motherhood. Lilith's story, especially as it relates to her leaving Adam in the Garden of Eden, resonates with many women who have felt marginalized or restricted by societal norms. Her refusal to return to Adam, despite pressure from divine messengers, symbolizes the strength to choose independence, even when it means facing isolation or demonization. This modern reimagining of Lilith as a feminist icon contrasts sharply with her role in ancient Jewish folklore, where she was seen as a dangerous and malevolent force. Yet, it's this very complexity that makes Lilith such a fascinating figure, a woman who, across millennia, has embodied both fear and empowerment. In Jewish mysticism, particularly in the Kabbalah, Lilith becomes more than just a rebellious wife or a demon preying on infants. She takes on a cosmic role, symbolizing the chaotic feminine energy that exists in opposition to the divine order. The Kabbalistic tradition, which flourished in medieval Spain during the 12th and 13th centuries, contains some of the most elaborate depictions of Lilith. In the central text of the Kabbalah, the Zohar, Lilith is depicted as the ultimate seductress and agent of chaos. Here, she is not only Adam's first wife, but also the consort of Samael, a figure often associated with Satan. This cosmic pairing places Lilith as a dark mirror to the divine feminine presence, known as the Shekinah, which represents purity, nurturing, and the presence of God on earth. In contrast, Lilith and Samael embody the disruptive, unholy union, representing lust, destruction, and the temptation of sin. Kabbalistic scholars describe Lilith as the embodiment of sexual desire unbridled by spiritual purpose. According to the Zohar, Lilith roams the earth at night, tempting men into sinful acts and seeking to steal the souls of newborns. Her seduction of men is seen as a way to drain their life force, while her attacks on infants are viewed as a perversion of the maternal role. However, it's essential to recognize that within this framework, Lilith also represents something more profound. She is the balance to the Shekinah, the negative aspect that must be reconciled for cosmic harmony to be restored. The Kabbalistic worldview is deeply concerned with dualities, light and dark, male and female, sacred and profane, and Lilith serves as the necessary dark counterpart to the divine feminine. This balance will only be restored when the Messiah comes, reuniting the Shekinah with her divine counterpart and banishing Lilith's chaotic influence. Kabbalistic traditions gained considerable influence in Jewish communities, particularly in Europe, during the Middle Ages. During this time, the figure of Lilith began to play an increasingly important role in Jewish mysticism and magical practices. She became the focal point for many Jewish protective rituals, especially those involving childbirth and the protection of newborns. One of the most well-known Kabbalistic practices to guard against Lilith was the use of amulets. These amulets, inscribed with the names of the three angels, Senoi, Sansanoi, and Samangaloth, were hung around the necks of infants or placed in homes to prevent Lilith from harming the child. The belief in Lilith's power was so ingrained that these protective practices continued well into the modern era and examples of such amulets can still be found in Jewish communities around the world today. As we can see, Lilith's image as a dangerous figure was deeply embedded in Jewish mystical traditions. But as we transition to the modern world, Lilith undergoes yet another transformation, this time into a symbol of female empowerment. The 20th century witnessed the revival of interest in Lilith, but this time her story was retold from a completely different perspective. The feminist movement, particularly in the 1960s and 1970s, reclaimed Lilith as a symbol of female independence, strength, and rebellion against patriarchal structures. In this modern reinterpretation, Lilith's defiance of Adam is not seen as sinful or evil, but as an empowering act of self-assertion. Lilith's story resonates deeply with feminist ideals of autonomy, equality, and resistance to oppression. In contrast to Eve, who is often portrayed as submissive and secondary to Adam, Lilith is a figure who refuses to compromise her independence or be dominated. She chooses exile over subservience, embracing her freedom even at great personal cost. Jewish feminist scholars like Judith Plasko have written extensively about Lilith, reinterpreting her story through a modern lens. Plasko's influential 1972 essay, The Coming of Lilith, reframes Lilith's departure from the Garden of Eden as a journey of self-discovery and empowerment. In this retelling, Lilith becomes a role model for women seeking to break free from the constraints of traditional gender roles. The figure of Lilith has also made its way into broader feminist discourse. The name Lilith has been adopted by feminist organizations, publications, and movements. Perhaps most famously, Lilith magazine, founded in 1976, is a Jewish feminist magazine that explores issues of gender, identity, and religion. The magazine's title reflects the power of Lilith's story as a symbol of female empowerment. Beyond feminist scholarship, Lilith has become a significant figure in popular culture, appearing in literature, music, television, and even video games. Her modern portrayal often emphasizes her mysterious and rebellious nature, making her an enduring symbol of defiance and power. One of the most notable appearances of Lilith in pop culture came in 1997 with the Lilith Fair, a traveling music festival founded by singer Sarah McLachlan. The festival showcased female musicians and was named after Lilith as a way to celebrate female independence and creativity. The choice of Lilith's name for the festival reflects how her story had been transformed into a positive symbol of female empowerment. In literature, Lilith has appeared as a complex and intriguing character in works ranging from fantasy novels to horror stories. Authors such as C.S. Lewis and George MacDonald have written about Lilith, often casting her as a villainess or a dark, seductive figure. But in other works, like those of Angela Carter or Margaret Atwood, Lilith's story is explored with more nuance, reflecting her evolution as a feminist icon. Lilith has also made her way into television and film, often portrayed as a powerful, seductive demon. From the Supernatural TV series, where she is depicted as one of the most dangerous demons, to True Blood, where she is seen as a vampire goddess, Lilith's image continues to evolve, reflecting society's fascination with her dual nature, both fearsome and empowering. As we conclude this journey through Lilith's mythos, it's clear that her story is far from static. Over 5,000 years, Lilith has been reinterpreted by different cultures, religions, and movements, each adding new dimensions to her character. From her origins as a wind demon in ancient Mesopotamia to her role as Adam's first wife in Jewish folklore, and finally to her modern reimagining as a feminist symbol, Lilith remains one of the most complex and multifaceted figures in mythology. Lilith's ability to defy categorization makes her such a compelling figure. She embodies both fear and fascination, destruction and empowerment. Her story reflects not only the cultural fears of the societies that created her, but also their dreams of independence, strength, and defiance. For many, Lilith's story is a reminder of the power of myth to evolve and adapt. Today, she serves as a symbol of the strength and resilience of women who refuse to be confined by traditional roles. Whether seen as a villain or a heroine, Lilith's journey through history is a testament to the enduring nature of myth and the power it holds to inspire and challenge us. Thank you for joining me on this exploration of Lilith. I hope you've enjoyed this deep dive into one of the most enigmatic and influential figures in mythological history. Be sure to subscribe, hit the like button, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Who knows what other ancient mysteries and forgotten legends we'll uncover next?